springing up, not just in this country but all around the world. The Occupy camps in Brighton, in New York and other places. I mean, that's just why we're having these kind of meetings, is why young people are again starting to look at the tactics that were used in the sort of poll tax and in other campaigns, thinking what can we do to defeat the cuts that we're seeing at the moment, which by the way are far worse than the box tax. They're a generalised attack on conditions and the working conditions of ordinary people. Well, I'm going to bring in our next speaker now. This is Donovan, who is the secretary of the London Anti-Poll Tax Federation. Again, Julie, you've asked you to speak for around about 10 minutes.
It's so appropriate, isn't it, that as working people all over the country are facing the attacks from the Tories of the 21st century, that we look at how we did inflict a defeat on the Tories of the 20th century. And not because it's not, just a nice memory, but because it does have lessons for us in the method that we used. Because it was a campaign of direct action, but a campaign that went so beyond protests and demonstrations, and a campaign of direct action that had a mass character. And the core of the campaign was the anti-poll tax unions. And as Bill said, it was obvious from the start there was going to be non-payment. Not, for many people, it wasn't a political question, it was an economic question. They did not have the money that was being asked for. And the meetings that we organised, people stood up, person after person stood up to explain what it was going to mean for them. And one man is stuck in my memory. I can remember him getting up, this was after 11 years of Tory attacks, where people had been literally driven, down. And I remember him saying, all I've got left is my fags. It's all I've got left in my life for me, and she's not having them. She's not having that last bit of what I've got. So there was always going to be non-payment, but the question was how to defend those people and how to give the campaign, how to turn those individuals into the 18 million non-payers. And the aim was to set up anti-poll tax unions in every local area. Where I lived in the London Borough of Southwark, we had 10 to 12 anti-poll tax unions based on the estate, trying to cover the whole of the borough. And we built the anti-poll tax unions by asking people to sign a pledge card that said, I pledge not to pay the poll tax. And it sounds kind of odd, just like signing a petition, but it wasn't. It was a conscious decision that people made that they were not going to pay the poll tax and that they were going to stand in solidarity with the people who couldn't pay. And it gave confidence to people that they weren't on their own, that they were a member of an organisation that had hundreds of their neighbours. We could say to people, sign this card because there's already, 80, 90 people on your estate who signed it. You won't be on your own, you'll be part of a mass campaign of resistance. And it's, again, it's so important to look back and to think it didn't happen by itself. The anti-poll tax unions didn't organise themselves. People went out night after night knocking on doors, signing people up with those cards. Hundreds of public meetings, telephone trees organised, because the question was how were we literally going to defend people? And the anti-poll tax unions had to be the first line of defence. In Scotland, we'd already seen hundreds of people turning up to stop the sheriff's officers, and we decided we would do the same. Firstly, by giving people information on the bailiffs, a mass campaign of information. Bailiffs have no right of entry. Don't open the door. Don't let them in. But also literally physical defence. And I remember anti-poll tax unions organising dry runs where we'd equip people with whistles. People would use pots and pans. Looking back to the tactics of the Communist Party in the 1930s, defending people from evictions. And then we'd say, right, someone would play the part of the bailiff, come onto the estate, whistles would blow, the kids would run out, everyone would run. This is what we're going to do if the bailiffs dare to come on this estate. And literally people would, post to their estate, bailiff-free zone, poll tax-free zone. But before the bailiffs could come to anybody, the local authority had to get a liability order. And that was absolutely crucial because the protests were fantastic all over the country. People protesting at the setting of the rates and so on. I remember when it kicked off in Tunbridge Wells, people really thought this is, something that has gone beyond anything that's happened before. And of course, the historic demonstration on March the 31st, 1990, which was so important. But when I was, one of the places I looked at when I was thinking about this was on Wikipedia, and it's quite a good description of what took place in the campaign, but it says the demonstration was what defeated the poll tax, and it wasn't. The riot, when people tried to defend themselves against the police attacks, all that was a very historic and important part of the campaign. But demonstrations and riots don't change the Tories' minds. And what we've just seen with the draconian attacks on the people who've taken place, in the recent riots in London, that's exactly what happened after the poll tax demonstration. I remember meeting a neighbour who said, my son was arrested at Trafalgar Square, he's doing 4 years, real vicious attacks on people. And they could ignore the riot, but what they couldn't ignore was the actual non-payment and the clogging up of the courts, because the next step in the campaign, the next strategy, was to get people to turn up to court. And the idea was that you could be a Mackenzie's friend, that anybody going to court has the right to take with them a friend. Anybody can go along, stand in there and defend them. And that's what we did. We acted as Mackenzie's friends, and you'd go in and you'd question the council officer. How many letters did you post? This was the sending out of the bills. Who went to the post office? Was the franking sheet? You could go on for so long. And in the end, the liability order would be granted, but you made it take 3 or 4 hours. Now, in the past, nobody turned up to court anyway when they hadn't paid their rates. Let alone it take 3 or 4 hours to see, one individual. And so this was the second stage of the campaign, to get people to turn up to court. And people did it in their hundreds. Again, I can remember Camberwell Court. One day 500 people turned up, and it was a bitterly cold day. And the police said, we're locking the doors. You're not going out. If you go out, you're not coming back in. And people said, don't worry about it, love. I'm saving on my heating being here. And it was like a party with people singing, people getting up on chairs to explain about the bailiffs and so on. And I remember people would come up with all sorts of things like, apparently, if you're pregnant and there's no toilet facilities, you're allowed to use a policeman's helmet to go to the toilet. And I remember the police deciding that perhaps they would let people out to use the toilet after all. And meanwhile, in the court, anyone who fancied themselves as a bit of a maypole with the baby would be in there, questioning the council officers and so on, and making this carry on for as long as possible. And these scenes were replicated all over England and Wales. And in the end, the liability orders that were granted were for bailiffs, because there was a lot in the beginning. There was a lot of worry about what would happen if you didn't pay. A lot of talk about arrestment of wages and so on, but the bulk of the liability orders were passed over to the bailiffs. And as I've said, we made sure that people had the confidence to understand that they could resist the bailiffs, by not letting them in, and also by these bailiff defence squads. So, really it was these tactics that made the anti-poll tax unworkable in the end. The demonstrations, but in particular the organisation of hundreds of people who built the anti-poll tax unions and who developed the tactics of the campaign, to a situation where we were able to get the poll tax abolished. And the importance of that, again, it wasn't just yes, it was economic, it was extremely important for people, but it reverberated internationally. I remember meeting a Canadian trade unionist shortly afterwards and saying to him it was so important for us because we hadn't had a victory in so long in Britain. And he said, no, we haven't had a victory so long internationally, and it was shown all over the world that British workers had defeated, in the 1980s, it was Thatcher, Reagan, Bolter, the arch representatives of capitalism, and we defeated Thatcher. We brought down the poll tax, and in the end, we brought her down too.